you had a very heavy day. The whole week was tough. I fully am aware. I also want to inform you that now, tomorrow, day after tomorrow, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday is actually resting. You have to pick up your notes, read, and sort of compose yourselves. Because right now we have to, this is the end of the midterm, and a very important subject. I'm having great difficulty to express it, because there is not enough material, orthodox text on that subject, and whenever we have something in the subject, it's actually glorifying humanism, rather than the Christian concept of art and culture. Father Pace, do you hear it?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, the subject is this. The arts and the pastor. And you will be required, your test, to answer various questions based on this text. There are certain points which you have to understand in order to pass. I'll warn you, which are the major points. First of all is this. Arts or artistic expression of a beautiful feeling or harmonious movement in the soul of any human being, from the very beginning of time, was associated with religion. Because religion is a way to, or an expression of acknowledging higher powers or Creator, God, who created the whole world harmoniously. We do not know, for example, which was first, the idea of worship or music, music or worship. The whole phenomena of worship is bound up with the idea of beauty. In fact, God, according to the Holy Fathers, God is creator of truth and also beauty. Dostoyevsky said, and you'll be required to know that statement, that beauty will save the world. By beauty is meant the expression of godliness in earthly terms for earthly human beings in the span of time here upon this earth, as the beginning for eternity. Eternity, as far as we know, or afterlife, is bound up with beauty. This expression in human beings of expressing, wanting to express beauty, harmony, and so on, is inborn in man. According to the Holy Fathers, it stems from paradise, and it will be in full splendor after the second coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. So therefore, beauty today, now, in human understanding, is a hint of paradise, is memories of the paradise lost, and in anticipation of paradise to come. This beauty, or concept of harmony, and refinement, elegance, and truthful expression of the exalted state, or idealistic state of man, this very expression has been the main element in worship, in religion. The more refined the cultures, the more refined the art. The cruder the culture, the cruder the arts. We know some primitive cultures. They have all these drum beats and all that. Some of them are, some of them, of course, it's difficult for us to understand because our standard is European concept. But it certainly is different between those drum beats and some kind of violin concerto of Mozart or Tchaikovsky. We also know this, and that is important for us to know, that human soul worships God through beauty, truth, and godliness. To human soul, it is understandable, that is, the human psychology, human psyche, understands, feels beauty without words. It does not require much words. When you see some kind of a beautiful painting or something beautiful, you don't need words to describe it. It's there. We apprehend it with our inner sense of beauty. You don't have to need words. Same thing with music. Architectural buildings. We don't need words. We see it. We apprehend with one, say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So in other words, it is a language. Beauty is a language. A great composer, perhaps the greatest composer of all times, Johann Sebastian Bach, used instruments and tones and modes in order to convey, that is, use them as a language. That a cello, sound of cello has one particular message. A violin, flute, it has a particular thing. So when he wants to say a certain phrase from Scripture that talks about trumpet, that talks about exaltation or rage of heaven or something, he uses instruments. And when you hear this without words, you get the point. In opera, they even use this same principle by so-called leitmotif. They use a melodic line or just few bars in order to hint a certain element. Let's say the heroine comes, and before she comes, you have those few bars coming, some notes, and you already feel, aha, she's about to come. Her element is present. The usage, in other words, it's a language. So therefore, it is important for Orthodox Christians to realize that worshiping God involves beauty. When I repeat myself all the time, because I want that idea to come across. When we come to church and we pray, we are utilizing our faculties that function through beauty. Poetry, for example, is the closest, perhaps, to all of the arts to the soul, except for music, is when words, not only words conveying a certain message, but order of them, or rhyme, or rhythm, or metaphors, or color utilized, has stronger meaning than just regular words. That's the difference between the poetry and prose. That prose is what, newspapers written in it's prose. But poetry uses various methods by changing word order or giving various metaphors. They evoke a sense of beauty that somehow harmonizes with us, and we see a different picture. You take some kind of a poem and you read this, you know this, you read this, but if you transliterate it or translate in terms of just describing as regular as prosaic, you get a different idea. Poetry touches the soul. Therefore, the pastor, an Orthodox pastor, cannot be insensitive or dead to the sense of beauty and harmony. All right, having said that much, the next point. Next point is this. The pastor whose job is to inspire, to move, to promote heavenly concepts for for his spiritual son or daughter. Pastor is handling a realm where the soul understands more than words can say. They say this, that music is the closest to the soul, because music is bound up with time. Ears are bound up with time, while sight, eyes, with space. Space is bound up with materialism, or with the idea of extending oneself out. While soul or sound, music, is on the contrary, goes inside. Therefore, the pastor in the Orthodox Church is sort of a priest of arts, where he utilizes that element of aesthetic aspect in order to save a soul. The very whole idea of saving a soul indicates it by this phrase that there is something ugly from which he takes the soul away and brings it some kind of harmonious beauty. The pastor, as I said, is a priest of these arts within the church, and therefore the church, the external aspect of the church, is adorned with beauty. As a rule, Orthodox principle, starting from Byzantium, of course in ancient times, but Byzantium was necessary when Christians became free. They were able to express that pathos, that feeling, that a state of apprehending reality, which they had formed in their mind while in catacombs. The sound of angelic singing, the movement of spiritual movements in their community had to be expressed so that the mobs, the unchristian, unsuffering souls that have been outside the barbaric world, that they'll have to understand. That's why with Byzantium, the beginning occurs with Christians to adorn the temples in such a way that the mere entrance, the mere looks inside, whatever occurs, will hint at the other world from which Jesus came. Therefore, the architectural structure of the temple, a church, although basically is that of the Old Testament, you know, the temple, the Holy of Holies, and the court, it's from there, but now they had to use that in order to convey a worldly message to those people who are far away from this experience. And therefore, the usage of, let's say, pictorial art, the icons. Icons are window to heaven, sure, but they are visual aids. They are implements by which a message comes across. When a person came in the beginning with Byzantium church, they would come in, the first thing he's baffled with the depiction of saints or scenes in the Old Testament or New Testament, Jesus, Mother of God's angels and saints. His eyesight received a message of the gospel. But the attempt was not just to make a picture, like cartoons, which is vulgar, but to hint through that depiction, that there is another world, a refined world, from which Jesus came. Therefore, the idea of otherworldliness was stored in church. The icons, the singing. Therefore, the icons could not be depicting the daily reality of a butcher shop or something like that. It didn't fit. Same thing, the music had to be refined, had to be hinting at celestial realms, whence Jesus came. The very scripture, the Psalms, and the biblical language is a poetical language. And therefore, they utilize this poetic language in their hymnography, in the description, or in the various hymns and songs and stichiras and all that, which would hint at another element, just like a poem. You read a poem, and it's quite a difference. If you like poetry, you can see quite a difference. You read a poem, and then some kind of description, prosaic description, there's a big difference. You see that there are hints in poems, the word order, the metaphor, the rhythm, the rhyme. It all adds to a particular message, which is to be not of this world. All the language in the church is poetic. That's why you cannot read the epistles as if you read a newspaper. Like the same thing you read a newspaper, the murderer, so the murderer came and then the policeman came and then the guns there and all that. And so the same way, you cannot read the epistles in the same way. There is objection. Some people say, doesn't it therefore estranges the man from daily reality? That Vatican II was concerned with that. Their idea is that, well, all this poetical, all this other worldly stuff in churches is actually moving people away from the daily reality of society today, which should be elevated. But what are you going to elevate with? The result is they did not elevate the society. On the contrary, they lowered the church standard. Now Roman Catholic Church is falling apart. Well, once there was a big thing, but now it's actually falling apart. And interesting, even the theologians, all that, they copy the mimic Orthodox. They use the term, they don't say Mass anymore, they say liturgy. The whole synod, they all go crazy about icons. They spend millions of dollars to present paint icons. They adorn the Byzantine icons. Clearly, they're lost. So therefore, the embodiment of Orthodox or Christian apprehension of reality should be in church in such a way that the soul will deliberately be moved outside of the world. Whence came Jesus? In other words, it's a stepping stone to heaven. Came from heaven and so to heaven. Of course, there are various styles. Since the 2,000 years of Christianity, various styles. But the whole idea of art was of this ecclesiastical art, was to move the soul to the other world whence Jesus came from. Therefore, icon is a window into heaven. Next question. The phenomena, the pagan Grecian idea of theater. Our expert on ancient Greek culture, Father Damascene, is washing dishes. He doesn't, I can say things he doesn't have. Oh, pardon me. There was, I don't know whether he mentioned, but there was, since time immemorial, such a thing as theater, or certain presentation, sort enactment to evoke a particular message, idea, feeling, or whatever. In all cultures, it's there. But the most refined one was in Greece, where they had these plays, Electra and Odyssey Rex and so on, whose, mostly tragedies, whose purpose was to evoke in the viewer a sense of something extremely important, like tragedy, people die and so on. That's very important. It's a question of life and death. But so that the viewer, seeing this, will, by participating, sort of viewing it, will at the same time get rid of that element which bothers you. That was catharsis. The idea was this. They were religious plays. People would come like on a pilgrimage. They would come and sit there, and they would have special sandwiches. They would feed them and all that, and they would stand there, and those actors would enact all kinds of tragic things and all these poses, which are all symbolic and all supposed to be a certain message in the symbolism in the poses and positions. And the people who come to watch, they would take part in it and would get spiritual transformation. They would get a certain change in their attitude. If they had for a certain hatred for something, now they would get rid of it. Or certain fears, they would get rid of it. They would have a different understanding. Now this idea was carried over to, of course, Christian society. But Christian society rejected theater for one reason, one big reason. Because the church system functioned as this theater. That's why St. John of Darmstadt could not tolerate theater, because he said they compete with us. In other words, it's a divine drama. And the church construction, as you know, it is like a theater. You even have a curtain. But it is divine. It is not play acting. Just like in those ancient times. Those actors that stood there and wept and all that business, they actually were performing a particular job. They were vehicles by which people would associate with their spiritual, their state, and would either get rid of certain things or acquire a particular impression and so on. It was the audience, the person, was supposed to partake, be moved by that which took place in those pagan spectacles. And Christianity was, after it became free, and you know it was in Greece, and it was in the time where Christianity, that is the pagan culture, reached its height. If you read Gregory the Theologian, you can see clearly how dramatic, or rather how theatrical, to quote, how dramatic he expresses some ideas. Some of his epistles are filled with these phrases which came straight into our church canons. The whole of Paschal canon, Christmas carol, canons, you know, during Matins. It all comes from St. Gregory the Theologian, who was very much involved in presenting Christian message to the mentality at that time of the Greeks. So he was aware, in fact, very often all these deities are mentioned, all these Venus and so on, they're all mentioned. Not in order to acknowledge them, no, but to use this very principle which they understand, by which he could come across with that spiritual message. It's interesting that the whole word muses were sort of deities of inspiration. The word music comes from that. The museum comes from that. It's muses. He talks about evoking the muses, the inspiration, so that Christians can do things. In other words, this is what's expected in the test. Christianity is divided into three categories, right? There is Catacomb, Byzantium, and post-Byzantium, which is now, or actually post-Christian era, which we experience now. So in catacombs, everything was concealed like an embryo. They developed the whole thing. When they became free, they came out of the catacombs. Mind you, their job was to missionize, to bring the good tidings to the people of these various temperaments, these various cultures that people experience. They had to make the message of Christianity palatable and understandable to these people of the Roman Greek culture. So they had to use their language. And thus, the liturgics came out of that. The subject of liturgics we'll discuss with Father Girassi. But for our purpose, when the question rises in arts, it is very necessary for us to acknowledge that the church service is bound up that which is, so now we understand the theater. Now the key phenomenon is this. Byzantium opened up otherworldliness in the best way they can in the language of that refined culture then to the barbarous, all kinds of nations and peoples and so on. They opened up, they developed a language, both through speaking and language of art, language of music, theater and so on. They developed a language by which this beauty, otherworldly beauty, would be transferable, so that people with various stages, whatever their culture they had, no matter how primitive, they would understand. The function of missionaries was not to change people. There was not to change, but confront them with the message of Jesus Christ. And they had to use the language of those people, and not necessarily in through utterance. The language of art, the language of music, the language of architecture, custom, and so on. And they did this job. And then approximately at the turn of the first millennium, then occurred the beginning of apostasy, which finally finalized in 1054, when the Roman Pope, with his armies, ecclesiastical armies, decided to build a society or Christian expression, not with gazing into the other world, but making it earthly. Thus, they decided to make a society, a religious society, a whole empire, based on the earthly things. And thus they gave rise to the so-called Renaissance. And the Renaissance is nothing else, the word Renaissance means rebirth, which is rebirth of pagan principles, the ones before they were baptized, before they were Christianized, before they were confronted with otherworldliness. It's undoing the job of Byzantine missionaries. And the result was the return to the pagan principle, very clearly could be identified through, for example, arts. In the pictorial arts begins the element of realism. Perspective pops up. The attempt to make figures look as real as possible, with all the warts, with all the broken teeth and all that. Well, before that, art served heaven. So obviously in heaven you won't have warts and broken teeth and so on. The idea was to present to the ideal form as is in heaven or will be in heaven. Now they were not interested anymore. I always use that analogy. If you go to museums, go to the statues and take a look at this ancient Greek statues and ancient Roman statues, and you'll see that in Greek statues the attempt was to represent a particular person in its ideal form. These God-looking people, refined people. And in the Roman statues, there is an attempt to portray a person the way he is, with broken nose, with cross-eyed, and so on. And thus, the two trends, sort of two ideas. The Orthodox remain gazing into paradise. The West Renaissance began to develop the earth. That's the key. In the Byzantium, they continued gazing into paradise through arts. In the West, they began to develop the earth with all its worldly, earthly passions, presence, and so on. That reflected in literature. The literature in the patriarchal societies we talked before was, of course, all ecclesiastical, was churchly. They were not interested in worldly things, newspapers, murders, and all that. They were not concerned. That was not a boring thing, because it's all earthly, fallen stuff. They were interested in refined things. So they would write that which is, as New York Times says, no newsworthy of news something. Read the New York Times.
All the news that's fit to print.
Right. In other words, only that which is fit. There are lots of stuff, but you don't have to bother with that. So what we have to bother is something that is of sensual nature. So therefore, the hagiography or hagiographical literature was bound up with presenting the saint as an ideal from the past and where he's going. They were not interested whether he goes to bathroom or so on. They're not interested. They were interested to present that state of a man who is created in the image of God, is presently here upon this earth, and fallen earth, and through combat, unseen warfare, changing himself, he comes into the glory of the image into which he was created in the first place. Therefore, hagiography was not interested to beautify things. The essence was already beautiful, full of beauty. After Renaissance, they began to beautify things because they were worldly, earthly. Because the concern was the focus was on the earth. So obviously, it's ugly, full of warts and so on. You need jazz it up. So this jazzing up revealed itself in endless amount of unnecessary adornment in the West, and we have these legends, endless amount of legends. Like Saint Sebastian was tied to the tree, and they threw arrows at him. And so he is tormented there, and he hears the voice of God, and he goes to heaven. And in the new verse is that he stands there, and his sweat falls down, and flowers come out, and they're beautiful flowers, and then there's lizards come out, and lizards carry this thing, and then all kinds of things that's weaved into this in order to make it pretty. Jazz it up. Why? Because the interest in the earth has its limitations, because we're created in the image of God. You understand? And our description of earthly things, I mean the divine things, are limited because we're still earthly. Therefore, the arts depicting beauty depends on the moral ascent of both the creator and the apprehender. Do you understand?
Say that again.
Say that again.
The moral state of a person who both creates and apprehends is the element that opens up realms that reveal to him the truth about reality. We, in our 20th century, who are the result of this apostasy, just a minute, we're the result of this apostasy, have gradually, or rather fast, lost not only the longing for this otherworldliness, which is revealed to you to the measure of your moral perfection, but we began to forget it and begin to glorify that which is earthly. Rembrandt. Mm-hmm. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. And thus, it's earthly, it's fallen. It's a nice quote, but it's fallen. I'll come to that in a minute.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
When a person prays to God, he encounters war within himself. This war refines his spiritual state. This refinement helps him to view or apprehend reality in more refined, idealistic way. The more he prays, the more he fasts, the more he disrobes of his fallen nature, that's human aspect, the closer or the more the other world reveals himself. Take life, Saint Macarius the Great. Who read his book, Homilies of Macarius the Great? Okay? You know what I'm talking about. Saint Seraphim Sarov. We know Saint Sergius Radich saw different colors, the rainbow. He was seen in uncreated light. Every time he served liturgy, an angel served with him. Only once his disciples saw that angel and was petrified, and St. Sergius turned to him and said, "Be calm. An angel is always present in church whenever he serves." An angel was epitome of beauty, because it's a servant of God. So therefore, arts are bound up hand and foot with the moral assent of both the creator and apprehender. Okay?
Repeat that again, would you please?
Word for
Exact same
word.
Exact same word.
A little slower.
Play it back. Play it back, George.
The arts are bound up with the moral assent of the
The one who creates and apprehends.
I thought I had to come out to somebody's good enough. Now, with this state, when man is in the state of apprehending divine beauty, he becomes estranged to the society that is earthbound. And therefore he becomes separate and misunderstood by that society, but very much appreciated by the ecclesiastical college of people who think the same way. Therefore, there is polarization of the ascetic, who is also aesthetic, and the man who is of the earth. Now, when 1054 occurred, and the Orthodox continued gazing into the paradise, the West began to create a better society. Their concern was to make it better. One of the first things popped up is this, which we now are clear, obvious sort of victims, is that each family had, since it was required from each Christian to expose the soul to the daily sacrament services, every 3 hours. Therefore, that each family had an oratory in which they would hallow, conceal, worship, present the images, the icons and so on, which hint at this other worldliness, this other thing where he comes from and goes to. And that very oratory or little chapel was a part of a family, a part of daily family. And with the rise of pragmatic society, that was removed. And what was installed in its place? Outhouse. Because the outhouse, you're not supposed to go to outhouse, to go to bathroom, viewing icons. Because outhouse is bound up with that element which is earthly, earthbound, and is going to, so it's a process of decomposition. Decomposed is going to be away, finished, it's not no part of us. So therefore it's supposed to be out from the house. In English you even have a good term, outhouse, which is outside of your house. Outside of your holy place where the children are born in order to become saints. Understand? There's no place. But with a society that has removed itself from church, they got rid of the orator in place in bathroom. You'll say, Father Herman, you are perhaps very outdated, but you have to understand the principle. Because if you are operating in your family and your chapel is there, lamps flicker and censer is going on, you get one feeling. And when you sit and next door, is is a flush toilet, like in Soviet Union. They don't have any ventilation. If you go to the bathroom, you open the door, all the fumes come right into your apartment. And then, since the windows are locked, it goes right into the hall. So therefore, the hall is filled with these fumes. And therefore, you come into the apartment, the first feeling is it's a sewer. That's not the refinement of the human soul which Christianity is talking about. See what I mean? Now, arts are bound up with that. Because art is expressing of one's ideal for God. Therefore, when the separation took place, God sent to the eastern countries a whip in the form of Tartars and Muslims and Turks. And they persecuted and tormented Christians, but Christians had to go through great difficulty in order to preserve their own identity, which was holiness. While in the West, there was no persecution. Oh, they had Lombards here and there, but it wasn't. And therefore, they enjoyed freedom. And that freedom, that peace and tranquility, only gave rise to the secularism, to the state when lay mentality, this humanistic approach, would overshadow Christian pathos, these arts. And the result is that these arts began to reflect earth. The arts were designed to reflect paradise, began to reflect earth. Thus, you see maybe very refined paintings of Rembrandt and so on, but that's earth. That's not like this. That has nothing to do, like for instance, these abnormally long figures. The whole intent is to idealize. When you see this, you're quite different from Dürer's painting. We have here one person who adores the Dürer. He ran away again. He's not here. Sure enough, he can't stay. Where nothing but warts, perpetual warts, and all these broken limbs come all over. The principle, I'm not sort of giving a whole, put it this, see? The ideal form, restrained, and if you look at their faces, they're actually gazing into another world. There's a special way of painting it. So when you look at them and the eyes look off, they don't quite look at you. And if they do, it's usually depicting contrition of heart. And if you're and it's created in order to have a message when you're in a state of prayer. When you do not smell the sewer, but on the contrary, you smell incense. Where you hear in your heart Sihiris rather than some kind of saloon, tingle-tangle girl saloon music. See? Now, to come to the another aspect of arts was, as I said, theater. Theater was totally overshadowed by church. And it remained in the realm of fairs or sort of like a cheap vaudeville, some kind of a thing which was sort of cheap entertainment on a very low level for kids or something like that, almost like puppet show. And the seriousness of art, of theater, remained mostly almost unnoticeable in church, except for those church services that were bound up with dramatization, like the canon of Annunciation. Notice this, and the angel said, and Mary replied, and the angel said, and it's supposed to be two different, they're supposed to sing a special tone and so on. If you will leave once more, you'll get into deep trouble, because I'm going to stop and you'll have to continue. And you will not be talking about Mickey Spillane. Next, in the West, therefore, the ecclesiastical realm continued, but they began to use these human earthly elements installed in church, like the instruments in the church. You cannot use in church, you cannot use instruments. Why? Because they're who knows? Why can't you use instruments in the church? Yes.
Because they're breathless.
They're breathless. And let every breath praise the Lord. It's about, because the highest instrument is human voice. John Sutton. And so on. Those instruments were Old Testament, although we have in Psalms, we have in Vespers, in Sonatas, and so on. But that's an element which can evoke human passions, because they are bound up with voiceless instrument, and the human voice should praise the Lord. The praises of the Lord should be human. But they began to use instruments. They began to use perspective in art. They began to use church. Some of the churches, like especially Rococo churches in Germany, they're very dramatic, very theatrical. They use the subject is clouds and saints and so on, but the whole thing is very dramatic, almost like drapery in front of some kind of a operatic performances, which actually it was. And to make it clearer is that the development of music, I understand Brother Gregory gave you the whole thing, right? Michael?
Yes.
The development of music was, to make it very simple, is this, that music was monophonic and so on, in order to, first of all, evoke a state of contrition. All this wailing and crying, you know, we have that in Mid-East, that the whole principle is that's otherworldly. Soul is crying for the Lord. When I cry in the Lord, you know, Lord, and the Vespers. Now, that's why they're very often in minor keys. And in 8 tones, actually the 4 in major key. But the other so-called plagal of the first, which is the 5th tone, it's actually in minor key. Now, the music, therefore, was in old, in the theaters, in those Greek theaters, they had music. They had instruments and so on, music playing. But in the West, the development of music went through pre-Renaissance, then Renaissance, which already began secular art, secular music. Before there was no secular, just folk dancing when you have a party in a village, that's about it. But they began to use, in the West, began to use music outside of church for dancing and so on. It continued, and the intent was, which has some value to that, is to uplift the person. For example, the high society concerts, the attempt was to gather them, have a nice dinner, and then some kind of refined music, in order to refine their souls, with vivaldi music and so on. The intent was to refine the soul, even on secular level. It developed into, after Renaissance, you have the Baroque period. And Baroque period, the idea is to have more intricate melodies or construction of melodic lines, sort of flowery. Most dramatic of that would be Rococo again, but which is also in pictorial art, in the musical too. But after that, there occurred the attempt, not so much in music, to make intricate melodies and so on, which Bach was excelling, although he was using for religious purposes, see? But the next step was, forget about the religious instrument, use music for its own sake in order to achieve the finest expression of human soul. And that would be Mozart. The attempt was, that's what it's called the classic period. Because the attempt was music for its own refinement. Ultimately, ultimately God. But there also the dancing of the human soul, sure. But that was attempt. And in the beginning of 19th century, when the music sort of began to develop in a more stronger way, then came in Beethoven, who decided to use music to express his own feelings, his own passions, his own murderous thoughts, and used music to express that, and thus became the expressionist, or we call it romantic music, because he was using music to express the passionate state of romance, which is a revival of romantic. It's a whole big thing. It continued in the whole of 19th century to the expressionism with Debussy and others. In other words, the romantic period in music was an attempt to use music to express, although very refinedly, to express passionate states. And therefore, the common works which they did, especially so-called oratorio. Oratorio is a work where you have a chorus and full orchestra and individual soloists in order to express usually a religious play or religious story, but without drama. As opposite when you put drama acting, that would be opera. The original attempt in those Renaissance period especially was to depict a religious theme. Like in this oratorios you have, by handle, you have many religious subjects, that the whole book of Esther, or Balthazar, or Judas Maccabees, the book of Judas Maccabees is that, and he presents it in duets and trios and so on, very refined beautiful music, in an attempt to grip your soul and so on, but on a secular level. But then in the 19th century, the arts became so strong and so overwhelming and overshadowed the church, the meaning of it, to such an extent that good Christian people decided to use the media of opera to convey a religious feeling, or, as the original Greek plays, to have this catharsis, in other words, to express through music, through the play, a special story that will change your life. That will be so strong, so emotional, that you will be so gripped by that, that your life will be changed. The attempt was made by many, Italian especially, composers, especially 19th century, who took some kind of very dramatic stories and made a play, and put it to music. And it has, opera is considered the ultimate art, because it contains the story, or the dramatic story, the play, which usually is written in poetry. So it has a rhythm and rhyme and an attempt to convey certain things which simple words cannot do, like poetry. It's a special strength there. Then you have the visual. You have the decoration, various scenes, costumes, lighting, in order to give you a picture come alive. And the third, which gives a third dimension, is music. And music used as language. That is, the sounds of instruments are used as language. So by putting a certain melody in a certain instrument, you get a particular message. And therefore you don't need words. Therefore the words will say something else, while the music already explains the whole thing to you, conveys, sort of reveals, it hits your soul, and your soul is gripped with a particular message, while the singing going on something else. Now, the purpose of that was this ultimate art, and how opera justifies itself, because comic opera does not justify itself, pardon me. It's sort of making it fun. The opera conveys a particular story, and since it's a Christian society, it conveys a Christian message which aids to the gospel message. That's its justification. In other words, they take a story of a fallen woman. We know Mary of Egypt, we know Mary Magdalene in the New Testament, a repentant woman. And so this particular composer takes the story of this fallen woman, makes it a play accessible to every person, and then through music, through highly melodic, lilting melodies, using the messages through the instruments, conveys her repentance. And the result is at the end of the opera, the whole opera theater weeps. The job is achieved. People come out of that repentant and softened. There is a case of a young man who was a teenager, was suicidal, and accidentally got into a movie theater, and was an opera made an Italian opera made into a movie, and he was so gripped that he was changed, and later became a monk, thanks to this particular worldly, mind you, opera. Yes.
Could you name a couple that you think are worthy of
Yes.
conveying that?
The one that moved such an individual is called La Forza del Destino by Giuseppe Verdi. The one about the fallen woman is La Traviata, which actually means the lost one, the fallen one. Then there's a great one. Then, of course, they take Shakespearean plays. There's Macbeth, Othello, Romeo and Juliet, very well. Then there's a fascinating subject, which is very important nowadays, is the Faust, an opera by Charles Gounod, French composer, French national composer. It's about, you know, the Faust, one who sold his soul to devil in order to retain youth. And he seduced a pure virgin girl, and through her prayers he was redeemed. Okay? There's a whole lot of wonderful operas, but at the same time there are a lot of operas which are, strictly speaking, again return to the pagan world. One of them is Richard Wagner. Although he is a very talented composer, one of the most talented composers, very original musician and so on, very strong personality conveyed, but he was not Christian. He lost the Christian pathos. And therefore his operas, even though when he takes this, some kind of a Christian subject of the Parsifal, of the Grail, it doesn't come out Christian, it comes as a revival of this paganism. Modern times have not have brought many good operas. Perhaps there is an attempt. I was not fortunate to see them. Or even when I listened, I did not find great satisfaction because Christianity does not come across through this thing. The Christian pathos, this redemptive quality, does not come through there. And therefore I pay no attention because it's clearly simply a product of Western decadence. But some of them, some especially composers, took great pain to create works of art which cost them their own lives. Some of them went crazy, like Donizetti wrote 73 operas, and finally went crazy, in which exceedingly profound ideas are embodied through very, so almost primitive, simple, lilting music. He was very talented in conveying this passionate state of man who is confronted with either truth or valor or love or passion or something, and when he's confronted with them, he has a Christian reaction to it. That's why it's very, very inspiring to see and especially listen to them, to these operas, because there is a definite Christian message comes across through music, even the story is painted. Now, tonight I'm going to show you here a Russian opera composed by Mussorgsky. He died 1881, was a talented man, but a drunkard. Or rather, he was alcoholic because he had, I guess Russian shlyapa or something. Very talented and very original thinker. Briefly about him is this. He, like many great Russian personalities, were very much passionately moved by big ideas. And being talented, they began to worship it. Of course, they had God and all that, but they were so overwhelmed by a big idea. He was overwhelmed by the idea to create an opera which would not have a hero, but the nation will be hero. And that this particular story would, in sounds, would be very close to the reality. For example, he deliberately, even though it was 19th century Russia, very modern Western society, he depicting the story that took place in the 17th century, it's a historic figure, but he's good enough. He was interested to present throughout the opera a feeling of patriarchal society. Therefore, you have these choruses and these basses coming up and so on, the whole atmosphere, how they lived at that time. The sound, he was interested in sound. Point of detail. In that story by Pushkin, there is a character who is fool for Christ's sake. Represents actual man who lived at that time was Nicholas Salas in Pskov, although it's placed in a different position. And he, in order to make on the stage a sound that would be true to a fool for Christ's sake, he deliberately traveled to a place where there was gathering a fool for Christ's sake. He was to be heard. And he hid in the bushes, the places where these fool for Christ's sake passed by or talked and so on. And he took notes. And he took it down. He sat there and took it down. So that the authentic sound, his theory was this: God created the world so beautiful that each sound, if properly depicted in our speaking or in the woods and the ocean roaring and all that, each sound is a masterpiece. But we are so insensitive, so crude, so prosaic that we do not hear this wonderful thing. He even concluded that human talk is a melodic, every nation has a different melodic phrases when you talk. In other words, there's a particular line goes on. Each has a different approach. When he talks, listen carefully. It's almost like Brooks. See? When Mother Sophia talks, it's just silence. Because she tries to exercise EC. So his point was that the sounds, if you're carefully, you can depict reality through sounds. Therefore, in this opera, it therefore became sort of a novelty. Because he was interested not so much in learning one melody after another, he was interested to convey a message that this person has through sound, not so much through idea, but through sound, through pattern of repetitious sound. And his attempt was to depict a society that has been gone, that as patriarchal society, Vatican II, schism, 1054. Therefore, one person went to see an opera and said, "Oh, it was like being in church." See? I just threw like I stood for 3 hours in church. Same feeling. Now, when he created this, with the help of his friend Rimsky-Korsakov, who felt sorry that he would get so excited, started drinking, and then he would stop, wouldn't be able to write anymore. So you have to get him excited to write, and then take the booze away. And then he goes on, and then it goes on, and he reaches for the booze, and he takes it away, and he goes, creates. But the moment he grabs booze, that's the end. See? So Rimsky-Korsakov helped him. He deliberately said, I'm going to be your roommate. We'll share an apartment together. So he would deliberately lock the booze and see to it doesn't go out. And they both would create operas at the same time. And he would come with these ideas. In other words, it's not just regular opera, but an attempt to, through sound, through singing out, to bring you closer to that reality which was in 17th century, which was actually mentality of pre-1054. He wrote this work, and when he presented it to the State Opera Theater, they said, certainly, well, that's impossible, it's not interesting. There's not a single heroine, for example, not a single woman. There are women pop up here and there, but there's no, the display of, what's the best thing about opera? Girls! Screaming girls, that's the best part of it. And so there's not a single screaming girl. See? So they say, no, we can't spend all that money, it's a huge, long thing, it's not worth it. Then Rimsky-Korsakov decided to make a party. He called all those people that he felt would be instrumental in producing this opera. He gathered them all, and he said, all right, now everybody's going to take champagne, you drink champagne, now listen, this man, this drunkard, wrote a stunning opera. I'll play you some parts. And he played. And one of the guests was an opera singer, prima donna. So the whole opera depends on her. And she was there. And she says, great opera, but I don't have any place in it. I would love to, but there's none. Why don't you create a scene and put me there, and I'll sing, I'll alter. Good. And you create this thing, and then I'm going to tell the opera directors, I'll say, nothing doing, I'm not going to sing anymore, anything. If you'll put that opera, then I'll sing the rest of it. See, other operas. And so it worked. They put this thing on, he created this special fountain scene, which we'll see. It's bound up with the Polish princess who wanted to become queen of Russia. And she could be, if this false Dmitri is helped by the Roman Catholics, will be able to come to Moscow with a whole army and pronounce himself the Dmitri who was killed. And she will be his wife. See? So she agrees. He persuades her at first, but then she agrees. The story is not too hard to understand what's going on, although it's all in Russian. And there's subtitles, so you can figure it out. After all, you're supposed to hear the sound. But the point of this man was that he wanted to, it's sort of like a super opera, not just opera, it's super, because there's a bigger thing to it than just a story. And when you, and the composer actually wrote another one, which will probably you'll hear another one of his called Havanshina, which deals with the old believers phenomenon. It's with the old believers who were ultra-conservatives. There was this modernists in church, ultra-conservatives, which is actually a very active, very serious phenomenon. We'll talk later on about that. We have a temptation in our 20th century Orthodox. We have temptation, old believers' temptations. See, so that's a necessary subject for our course. But to end up on that thing is this: you're expected to know that arts are to be tools in the pastor, in the church. And the logical question is, how come that nothing of that is apparent in today's ecclesiastical structure? And to answer that question to Father Philip is the following. It is much safer to sit in your church and to do your daily sacrament services, and don't bother too much, figure out how your flock is suffering here and there, what they're doing. Much easier. Concentrate on sensing, on your daily sacrament services, and you'll be all right. Just do what the bishop says and you're okay. And the result is this: church, therefore, an embodiment of ecclesiastical creativity, becomes imprisoned by outdated, small-minded clerics who are afraid to change souls. If you don't like that answer, I can elaborate just a little bit more.
That's a pretty good answer.
Because in our churches today, when you come to church, you see clearly that people are conservative, very much afraid to go and to like street mission, or someone in trouble, or to figure out why is he having trouble, what's his problem. The church, the pastor is supposed to know, figure out he can figure out only if he knows what kind of work he does, where he lives, what are his inspirations. And you have to risk your own sort of tranquility by perhaps he'll bite you back. Perhaps you're an alcoholic. You have to do something, help him out and figure out why that happens. In other words, this pastoral zhilka, this element, the pastoral element, is creative. So a pastor, by being a pastor, he has to be creative. If he's creative, he'll automatically support the arts. Because the seat of arts is within the church. The seat of the legitimate, the original, the perfect arts is within the church. Because it's bound up in the church. And the church, the soul, is bound up in the church. Is that clear? Yeah. All right. Now be aware, there will be a test on this subject. And I would like very much you to get the principle. Discuss this weekend with your friends and figure out how you're going to answer those questions. Because if you will fail this test, that means I fail. And if you have any mercy on me, you're going to study, you understand? And there's no for, I won't take no for an answer. Okay. Okay, now, take a break, get ready, put the chairs on, and we'll start the show.